Guy, are you kidding me? Are you kidding? Everyone should read this book. I'm gonna put on some lip balm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Alright, alright, alright. That's what I'm talking about. I toast the groom to the bride, your sister, Angelica. Side to your union. And hope value. Where's my tea? Hello everybody, welcome back to Artist Archives. My name is Nikki and I'm just going to be talking to you about some books I am very excited to read. There's an author that I think I would like to prioritize in 2025, prioritize reading their books, and that author goes by the name of C.S. Lewis. Fun fact, the C and the S stand for Clive and Staples, which I just think is incredible. Clive Staples Lewis. And for a long time I have been saying that he is my favorite author, but have I read all the books he has written? No. And have I read enough? In my opinion, no. So I'm upset about that. So you will probably know C.S. Lewis from Narnia. This video is literally me I'm going to talk about his books, why I'm excited to read them, and which ones I've already read, so we can keep on track. And I'll just update you with the different books I've read. So a bit of information about C.S. Lewis in case you've never read his books or you don't know too much about his life. So he was a British writer, a literary scholar, and an Angelica. I've been listening to Hamilton's soundtrack just before now. He was an Anglican lay theologian. He was also a teacher at the University of Oxford, and he was contemporary and a best friend of Tolkien. He's best known as the author of the Chronicles of Narnia, of course, but he also wrote books such as the Screwtape Letters and a book that is very, very popular called Mere Christianity, which is a great example of Christian apologetics. Christian apologetics is a genre of literature. Basically what it does is that it encompasses arguments or a defense for why Christianity is true, right? So not every Christian book is an apologetic book, but an apologetic book is specifically, you know, a non-fiction book that says, here is my thesis, this is why I believe Christianity is true, here is the evidence to support it. So he wrote a lot of Christian apologetic books, and growing up I'd only really heard of Narnia as a kid, you know. Then I grew up and I thought, oh, he wrote apologetics, okay, that's interesting. Now I'm someone who is very interested in theology, but I wouldn't say I've read a lot of books within the apologetics sort of genre. C.S. Lewis is my favorite of the ones I have read. Is he the only one I've read? I don't even know. He can't be. He can't be. I've read so many Christian books growing up, but C.S. Lewis. So we're going to move into why I adore C.S. Lewis, okay? C.S. Lewis's writing style, his unapologetic approach to the Christian faith, and honestly the intelligence it's just so beautiful and unique. And just like, when I read C.S. Lewis, I just think you must have spent so much time in God's presence, praying and reflecting and studying the Bible. Like, the wisdom I think is incredible. And so I would like to read more C.S. Lewis, and I think in reading C.S. Lewis I believe that I'm going to grow in my thinking, in my understanding of the faith. So let's move into the books that I have read by C.S. Lewis and why I put him as my favorite author. So the book that put him on my list of favorite authors is this one, The Screwtape Letters. And this is a book that loads of people had told me to read, including my quote-unquote my granddad. He's not my granddad, but I call him my granddad. And he was like, you need to read the Screwtape Letters. And honestly, I was like, what does Screwtape even mean? Like, it wasn't sounding exciting. It wasn't sounding that interesting. And one day I picked it up. Guys, are you kidding me? Are you kidding? Everyone should read this book, okay? So regardless of faith background, because I recommend this to everyone. If you're wanting to start with C.S. Lewis and you've already read Narnia, Screwtape Letters. Are you kidding me? So the concept of this book, and I love it so much, it's very easy to read. The concept of this book is essentially that there is a senior demon writing to a junior demon, right? So the junior demon has been assigned to a young man, basically to torment this young Christian man. He's a new Christian, right? So he's learning about the faith and that kind of thing. And the senior demon is basically writing ways to like make this man stumble and da 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 da. The reason I say this is great for anyone to read is because it's not really, how do I put it? If you're not Christian, it's basically talking about the problems we have with as mankind. It talks about some hypocritical ways that some people behave in. It just talks about issues as mankind in general. And so I think you will be able to recognize yourself in this. It's not just a Christian who recognize themselves, like it's anyone can recognize, oh, sometimes I act out of anger or greed or whatever. It actually becomes a very, I would say, quite a philosophical book in a way, but it's all done through this humor and through this, like, it's just so smart. And it's an epistolary novel, which I don't actually tend to read, so it's all written through the series of letters. So his perspective of how can we get more humans to fall away from God, basically, and like how can we get more people on our side and more people going to hell, essentially. And it's just, but it's like the humor is so good, but then it also makes you feel like you feel like, oh my goodness, he really came for me there, because you notice the times where like, oh my gosh, I do that sometimes, or I've been tempted in this way, or da 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 da, and you just feel like, oh my gosh, he just came for. And here's the thing, and this is one of the reasons I like C.S. Lewis's like other non-fiction books, which we'll get to in a moment, is because he has such a direct way of writing. This is all, you know, like this is not this direct thing, but the feeling I get from reading C.S. Lewis reminds me of the feeling I get when I read Paul's letters in the actual Bible. The reason Paul is actually one of my favorite writers in the Bible, and I know this is very controversial because some people don't like Paul, whatever. What I love about Paul is he is so unapologetic. He is so like, this is what I'm saying and I'm just going to say it clearly so that you will understand. I'm not mincing words, and I think I find that a lot in C.S. Lewis's writing, and I really enjoy it. So this, pick it up. It's very funny, it's dark, it's dark humor, it's makes you think a lot, and it's not a book that, it's not an apologetic book. Like, this is like a really, really great book. I just recommend it to people all the time. It's one of my favorites. Now obviously we can't talk about C.S. Lewis without talking about the Chronicles of Narnia, and so I've got a few of the books. Oh, okay, I have most of them. So there are 7 books in the Narnia series. Book 1 is The Magician's Nephew, which I really enjoy and I've read. Then book 2 is The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. I don't know where my copy for that has gone. Book 3 is The Horse and His Boy, which I have read. Book 4 is Prince Caspian. So I think this is where oh, maybe. So I think book 4 is actually where I stopped. And I know you're looking at me going, C.S. Lewis is your favorite writer and you haven't read his most... Guys, I'm interested in the apologetics, okay? No, okay. Let me explain. So when I was a kid, I watched the movie The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, or the Narnia movie, which was great. Then I learned that there was a book and I was like, oh, amazing. And then from my friend, I learned that they were Christian books, and I was like, they are? Because I hadn't picked up on those themes in the film, because I watched them quite young. And because it's an allegory anyway, so you can watch it without knowing that much. But anyway, so then I found this huge bind-up copy of all the books, and I read the first one, The Magician's Nephew, and I was so confused, because if you haven't read this one, it's very confusing because it's in the Narnia world, but it kind of works almost like a prequel. You don't have Lucy, you don't have Edmund, you don't have Peter, you don't have Susan, like they're not there. But it's really good. Like, I really enjoyed this. I've read this like a few times. I've read the second one, I've read the third one, and at some point I just stopped. Not because I wasn't enjoying it. I think they're all like in this world and they've got a certain voice, and I was finding it difficult to read all of them back to back, and then once I stopped I just didn't pick them back up. So at some point we should actually finish the... I don't know how this series ends. All I know is the problem with Susan, like something happens with Susan. I know what happens with Susan. That's it. I don't know what else happens. I don't know. I don't remember. We have to start this series from probably book 3 again. Yeah. Okay, then I don't know where I've put it now, but I've read a copy of How to Pray by C.S. Lewis. Now here's the difficult thing with this challenge. It's not difficult, but I have to put down some laws. So what I'm trying to do, read every single book by C.S. Lewis, but to complete this challenge I want to read the books he actually wrote, because since his death there have been a number of releases of collections of his sayings, different letters and that sort of thing compiled together to make new books. And whilst I do want to read those, once I read everything that he published while he was alive, that's what I'm going to call as I finish this challenge. I'm not sure how many books. Should I Google how many books did C.S. Lewis write? Yeah, about 40 books. There we go. Okay, so I read How to Pray, which is actually different collections of different letters. Some sections are even taken from the Screwtape Letters. I will say that is a fantastic book if you're a Christian and you're wanting to learn more about prayer. It's very small. It's like some of the stuff is mind-blowing. Like his explanation of how eternity could work, mind-blowing, because I'd always been, no, it's his, oh my gosh, okay, so he has this chapter where he basically explains the idea of like prayer, like why pray if God already knows everything since the beginning of time. So like, do prayers actually change God's mind? And like, how can something you pray today change something if God has already predetermined it? And he explains it in such a way where you're like, yo, that actually makes sense, that something that's been decided but something I'm praying now are like guys, the thinking, read it, it's so good. Okay, so other books by C.S. Lewis. I have, oh gosh, I have the complete signature classics. I feel like every C.S. Lewis fan has the complete signature classics, and I can't believe I haven't read these. Like, yeah, I bought them, I was so excited to read them, and then I never actually did. So we have Surprised by Joy, of which I've read quite a bit, but I read it probably at the wrong time, so I'll have to go revisit that. So Surprised by Joy is his book basically explaining how he became a Christian, why he became a Christian, a bit about his childhood, his upbringing. So it kind of functions as an autobiography, but it's like his walk to faith. If you don't know, he was serious, quite a big atheist, and then he had this really interesting conversion as he set off to disprove Christianity. So this is his book basically about how he came to be surprised by joy. There's Miracles, on the nature of miracles, The Problem of Pain, the Screwtape Letters, as I've said, I've got 2 copies of that. The Four Loves, The Pilgrim's Regress, which is obviously in conversation with The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan, and then we have The Great Divorce. So these are all books that I'm looking forward to getting to soon. And what I love about C.S., I can't read him too quickly. Like, I have to sit and savor and really think and reflect on what he says. His stuff is incredible. We have Reflections on the Psalms. This is a lovely book because he says in the opening that this is just he's comparing notes in this book. It's not him necessarily trying to teach. It's not him trying to be like, this is the definitive analysis of the Psalms. He's basically saying, look, there's a few topics in the Psalms that have always confused me. These are the things that I'm thinking about it. Let me know what you think. Like, it's a very unfinished, but not in a bad way. It's a very like, here are some thoughts, let me know what you think. And I like that. It's a very it's a nice attitude. He kind of talks about this idea of, for example, sometimes when a teacher is teaching a child, I might just read you what he says because I quite like it. He says, so this is not a work of scholarship. I am no Hebraist, I hope I pronounced that correctly, no high critic, no ancient historian, no archaeologist. I write for the unlearned about things in which I am unlearned myself. If any excuse is needed, and perhaps it is, for writing such a book, my excuse would be something like this. It often happens that 2 schoolboys can solve difficulties in their work for one another better than the master can. When he took the problem to a master, as we all remember, he was very likely to explain what you understood already, to add a great deal of information which you didn't want, and say nothing at all about the thing that was puzzling you. I have watched this from both sides of the net, for when, as a teacher myself, I have tried to answer questions brought to me by pupils, I have sometimes, after a minute, seen that expression settle down on their faces, which assured me that they were suffering exactly the same frustration which I had suffered from my own teachers. The fellow pupil can help more than the master because he knows less. The difficulty we want him to explain is one he has recently met. The expert met it so long ago that he has forgotten. He sees the whole subject by now in such a different light that he cannot conceive what is really troubling the pupil. He sees a dozen other difficulties which ought to be troubling him, but aren't. And so then he continues basically saying that in this book he writes as an amateur. He writes as one amateur to another, talking about the difficulties he's met or lights he's gained when reading the Psalms, which is a book of ancient poetry in the Bible. Many of them written by King David, many of them written by King Asaph, which I'm learning more about now. I don't really know too much about, but yes. So anyway, so this is this book, and it notes, theories, musings on the Psalms. It's very interesting. Highly recommend it if you're reading the Psalms. If you're reading Psalms, if you have read a Psalm, maybe consider picking this one up. Why has this become a recommendations video? Now, the absolute classic, the absolute banger, and Mere Christianity. This is an absolute banger. I think I'm probably about this far into the book, and I do need to go back and finish it, and I will certainly be rereading it. This is fantastic. So this is an example of apologetics. This whole book is basically written from C.S. Lewis's perspective, basically saying this is why I believe Christianity to be true. This is why I personally believe it to be true. These are all the questions and queries I had, and this is how it's almost saying like he takes every single, how do I put this? He takes kind of sort of every single issue you could possibly have with Christianity and just kind of explains them, but through theologically, I believe, quite accurate. It's not just his opinions, it's basically him saying like, let's look at this. But I can understand how for someone who isn't Christian and who doesn't yet believe in the authority and infallibility of the Bible, that it can be quite frustrating if you have a question for someone to only answer it with the Bible. So I think what's so good about this is that he's not saying, how do I put this? He basically looks at life, the same life that you see and that I see. He's like, let's look around at the world together and let me tell you why I think, how I came to the conclusion that there is a creator. So it's a chronological book. He starts with one issue. Once you're agreed on the subject, he then moves on to chapter 2. And once you're agreed on that subject, he's like, great, then we can move on to this. So through a series of agreements, you get to this point where you go, there has to be a creator. It's really good. I highly recommend it. There's only one point that I remember that I really was like, well, I didn't agree with, but it's excellent. I do think for the most part it is brilliant. I'm so tired. And apparently this was originally a series of talks given to the BBC, so I'm assuming there's a talk version of it. I'm assuming there's a lecture version of it, but yeah, this is the book. It's really fantastic. One of my favorite things in here actually is his explanation of the Trinity. Like, how can, so basically the Trinity, this idea of the Trinity, of there being the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit, but there being one God, but in 3 expressions, 3 persons with a capital P, right? How can that be? It's very confusing sometimes to wrap your head around. I get confused with it sometimes. Like, it can be very confusing, and he has such a brilliant explanation of how the Trinity can be the Trinity but not cease to be one God. And I just thought it was so good and so compelling, and it was this, I can't do it justice right now, but it was so good. But he basically starts talking about lines and then creating cubes and then creating squares. He basically talks about lines, creating squares, then creating cubes, and basically talks about how things exist on different dimensions and how in different worlds you wouldn't recognize that there was another dimension that even existed, but how a line never ceases to be a line even if the line now constitutes a cube. It sounds weird that I'm expecting, trust me, when you read it, like, it is mind-blowing. It's so fantastic. So of course C.S. Lewis wrote many more books. There are books such as A Grief Observed, for example, which I'd definitely love to read. And if you don't know, there's a whole slew of science fiction books that he wrote, which I've read parts of them and I'm like, these are actually really good. Not actually, I'm not surprised. Love his writing. His actual writing style is stunning. C.S. Lewis is fascinating because he has books from children's books, young adults, books that are apologetics, books that are allegory. So thank you so much for watching. Please do drop this video a like and comment down below if you've read any C.S. Lewis books, or if there are any from here that spark your interest and that you would pick up, because that would be so exciting. And yeah, subscribe along and I will update more of my C.S. Lewis reading journey as I go along. Let me know who your favorite author is, and I will see you in another video. Bye.